At seminary. It's all very consistent.
All right, everybody. We are live right now, whether you are joining us in person or, well, I guess virtually in person live right now, or whether you are watching this later. We are glad that you are here, and we will do our normal hobnob for about 10 minutes or so while people jump on board here. So as you jump on, if you can comment who you are so we know who we're talking to, because in general, we cannot see through the way that we stream this who's watching with us unless you comment. So it helps us out a lot when you do that. And of course, always, even if you're watching this later, if you want to comment on something, we'll see it and we can still respond to you as well. So I'm going to kick it over to Keri Lynn because we have a special guest and she can introduce our special guest.
I am so excited. So this is another David that I have in my life. So this is David Maguianis, and David so we had Katie on a few weeks ago. And what I told everybody about Katie was Katie sat on this side of me in every class in seminary, and we would say really sarcastic comments and usually get in trouble for them. So usually on the other side of me in every single class in seminary was David Maguianis, who would engage by laughing at our sarcastic comments, but his laugh is fairly quiet. So David got probably in less trouble than the rest of us did. But David was kind of always part of our shenanigans. I think my favorite story to tell about David is before we were even really friends, David asked me to be the secret photographer when he proposed to his wife, Amy.
Cool.
And yeah, it was awesome. Like I was like hiding in the bushes at the Arboretum and Amy was like not well. And so David was like, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, this is literally fine. Like, don't worry about me. You have a big day. So I always joke, like before we were even friends, like I was there on what is now like the second most important day of your life so far. And it was fantastic. And we just became really good friends. David is just one of those people that you want to always have on your team. David will sit and listen to all your problems. So as an extra chatty person, I need that calm listening person in my life. And
we're handing out David's card for therapy for anybody who's watching or just take a listen. Yeah.
We'll put his Venmo in the comments. So we went through school together, but David's actually a friend that like I continue to be friends with after school, which is half of a miracle when you're pastors and you're busy. And David's the high school pastor at First Richardson, and his wife Amy is a lot smarter and cooler than he is, which is saying a lot. They're both amazing. We do Friendsgiving every year, like just the best people. Amy is just a whole other wonderful human being, and their dog Kona is the sweetest puppy ever. So yeah, David, did I miss anything you want to add, or any embarrassing stories about me you want to tell?
No, I mean, I was just thinking
Katie did.
Do what?
Katie did. She told some stories.
I thought I was listening on that one and waiting to hear if I knew of any stories that she was going to say or anything like that. So.
See if you went down with me.
Exactly. Is she going to bring me up or like bring us down or something like that? Yeah.
I was thinking maybe y'all like took notes ahead of time to make sure that you covered all of them between the two of you.
Maybe. No, I mean. I haven't chatted with her in a little bit, but just after I texted you guys, I was like, hey, I watched you guys, and it was cool. It was cool to watch you guys and stuff. So yeah, but no, I was thinking about like the engagement was a big one because I had asked someone. He's like, oh, I'm not that very good photographer, and he's like, you can ask Keri Lynn. I was like, oh yeah, I'll ask her. And so that's how it happened.
The first like 2 months of seminary, like I mean, nobody knew which way was up. Nobody was friends.
Right.
Like we all were like learning all the things you learn the first 2 months of seminary that ruin your life.
Right.
And so it was so cool to have this like happy thing in the midst of that and to make two friends really along the way, which is extra special. So yeah, I was thinking about that the other day. Like that was so fun.
Did you say your wife was sick when you were proposing to her?
She wasn't feeling the best. So I think she'd actually come down with like a cold or kind of flu-ish type of thing. And I gave her some medicine and it had antihistamines in it. And so she was like knocked out for like the night before and like the whole next day. And she was like, when I got over to pick her up to go on this date or whatever, she was like asleep and like half awake, and I was like, hey, come on, we still want to go, and all that sort of thing. So
right. You had to like show her the photos afterward to be like, hey, remember this happened. Like it was a good thing.
Exactly.
Well, I think hearing Amy's version of the story is really fun too, because she's like, I don't like at first I just was confused why he was so adamant to go walk around the Arboretum.
Exactly. And like I was just kind of like booking it too. She was talking and I was just like, we need to get to the spot and we need to get here, and yeah, so
it was amazing. And like my favorite part was like I was very like, and I wasn't like super David's friend yet, but I still just felt very loyal to David in this moment, that this picture that I take has to be like the best ever. And so people kept coming over. I'm waiting at this area for like an hour. Like it was way behind. And every time somebody would come over there, I'd be like, you have to leave. Someone's about to propose.
That's awesome.
I was the Arboretum jerk.
The pictures were perfect. Pictures were perfect.
So
They're great. They're great.
I'm thinking this is the arrest record on your background check of disturbing the peace at the Arboretum.
That's me. You hired me. Joke's on you.
That's right. Yeah, we did the background check after the job was extended. We really should have done. We should change that order, I think.
Oh man.
Just fair warning, Katie Glass is on here. So
I saw that. I see it.
Yeah. Bless her. Oh gosh.
Yeah, and any other stories of us? I think we went to Israel together, and we went to the famous General Conference last year, 2019. We did that together.
So here's a fun story that you may not remember, David Maguianis, but when we were at General Conference last year, we were sitting there and like, from our standpoint, everything's falling apart. Because votes did not go the way we wanted them to. In fact, they went worse. And so David and we like kind of removed ourselves from everybody else. Like we were sitting like really, and I had all the snacks. So we were making lots of friends because I was very prepared. And that was a couple of weeks after my interview at Creekwood. And so right as the church is falling apart, I look down and I'm getting a phone call from David Lessner. And I wasn't going to answer it because I looked at David Maguianis and I said, I just can't take any more bad news today. Like they're not going to give me this job. Like I'm so not qualified and can't do this. And I'm not a big kid. And David goes, well, why don't you just answer it in case it's something good? And so I like leave and go in the hallway and I have this whole conversation with David Lessner. And he's like, yeah, I'm calling to offer you a job. And I was like, wait, really? And then I came back and I think I told David Lessner like, oh, I need a week to think about it. And I sat down and I think right as I like had that conversation with David Maguianis, I was like, why did I tell him I need a week? I need like 2 minutes. And then I took the job like 3 days later. So Creekwood, it's all David's fault is the moral of this story.
We can all blame him for all of this. This is,
Exactly.
I love Jen Jurick's comment here. He's like, I remember going places and doing things with friends. Good times.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Like a lifetime ago.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah. Katie's bringing up the pants conversation.
I feel like we need to just ditch Mark and just like let's have Keri Lynn's rap sheet go on here.
This is not embarrassing for me.
This is on me.
Oh, okay.
You can choose if you want this to be on the internet.
It's all good. So we got to Israel, and it was like our first day or something like that. I felt fine, and then one of the meals I had just didn't sit right with me, and got sick. I think it was like a mixture of the time change and just like everything going on and just like being in this new place, got sick. And so from then on out, I think we had another meal the next day or something like that. We went to somewhere else. I still didn't
David just ate bread. Like that's what he ate in Israel.
Yeah,
like
pita bread.
And the day you got sick, I like ran to the bus and I got my emergency medicine that I had already had because I'm always prepared. Like I then like turned into mom and I'm like watching David just eat bread at every meal. It's so sad. Like it was tragic.
Bad. But the whole pants thing is that from then on out, the rest of the trip, I always carried an extra pair of pants with me just in the event that I always needed an extra pair of pants because I didn't want to be caught without having an extra pair of pants.
But he didn't tell us until the last night. And so we're all having a great time sitting around in the hotel lobby. And he goes, guys, I need to tell you, I've been carrying an extra pair of pants in my backpack for 15 days. And it's never not funny.
Yeah.
So like
Katie
really
made you tell that.
I really feel like that should have come out when when we start talking about Jesus is what comes out of your body defiles you later on. I feel like that's a perfect story for that.
Oh my God.
Also, I think the waterboarding ministry needs to know that, to know how prepared you actually are.
Exactly. I'm always prepared. I come prepared with.
It was a very Boy Scout moment, yes.
Go for it. You go for it.
Oh no, it became just such a. I mean, I thought Katie Glass. I'm pretty sure she fell out of her chair when you told her, because it just like we weren't even talking about it. Like we hadn't talked about David being sick since it happened, and then it just when you're with your friends and you've been in a foreign country for 17 days, you just say things.
Exactly. We got pretty close that trip. We all became pretty good friends after that trip, just because we just told everyone everything.
So. The best.
Yeah.
Yep. That may be the best pre-Bible story shenanigans we've had thus far.
Perfect. I love it.
All right. So, I think Keri Lynn is guiding us through Mark chapter We're on chapter 7 this week. 7. If anybody wants to jump on board, getting your Bible out or reading on your phone, which we're not quite halfway through, but we're getting there. So Mark is moving along through here. So David, we're really glad you're here. I mean,
for Bible study, not just for the pants story. Yeah, we're glad you're here to bring wisdom from your education and your brilliance, not simply because a bad thing happened to you and you were prepared.
I'll try.
I mean, doesn't the best learning come through experience anyway? So
definitely.
Yeah. It'll be a great sermon one day.
Yeah, for real. Like put it in a sermon illustration or something like that. Yeah. Preparedness. I like it.
Awesome. Okay, so we're gonna do chapter 7. So chapter 7 has less stories than the other chapters in Mark so far, but they're loaded. Like I sent these questions out to the two of them yesterday, and I was like, there's no easy question tonight. No. So sorry, which is why we're keeping it light here at the beginning with the
That's what makes it entertaining.
So just recap of Mark if you're joining us for the first time. So the biggest thing with Mark, it's the shortest gospel. Every detail that's included in Mark is important. And I think we're going to start to where we see a really interesting version of Jesus in Mark. If you take Mark just by itself, there's a lot of emphasis on the human nature of Jesus. And we see that really, really, really intensely here in a story that is interesting to interpret. But also the divine of Jesus shines through in Mark. There's a lot of healing stories that are told in Jesus in Mark, and the healing story we're going to read tonight is very strange. And I think if this is the only gospel that healing story appears in. Do either one of you have anything to add as like a Mark overview note?
I think the healing story is in Matthew too. I think it's.
Oh, I'm wrong.
Yeah.
I hate it when that happens.
I just like to point out how you're wrong at least once a day.
Just like a good senior pastor should do.
Well, I don't know if I'm trying to preserve the hierarchy or the patriarchy or something. I'm just trying to make sure that we stick to
change, man.
I know. No, I think you covered it. That's great.
Okay, yeah. Great. Okay, so well, and we had like the prime Gospel of Mark scholar as our professor in New Testament, and so I feel like I just try to spit out like half of what he said in this Bible study alone. So that's kind of some of the high points of that. So we're in Gospel of Mark chapter 7. We're going to do verses 1 through 8 to start with. So it says, now when the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem, so they're still in Galilee, so they went on a trip to make this visit, gathered around him, they noticed that some of his disciples were eating with defiled hands, that is, without washing them. For the Pharisees and all the Jews did not eat unless they thoroughly washed their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders. And they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash it. And there are also many other traditions that they observe, the washing of cups, pots, and bronze kettles. So the Pharisees and scribes asked him, "Why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands?" He said to them, "Isaiah prophesies rightly about you hypocrites." This is jerky Jesus, by the way. Some like to say direct communicator Jesus. I prefer jerky Jesus. So Isaiah prophesies rightly about you hypocrites, as it is written, "The people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition." So a couple of notes. Again, the Pharisees, it says the Pharisees and some of the scribes come from Jerusalem. So we know that there's kind of this intentional effort of like some form of travel for people to come to Jesus. And we've seen like small details included that are showing us the growing of Jesus's movement, right? I think it was in the last chapter, like he can't go anywhere without people following him and bringing people to him. And so this is the start, I think, of some of that rising action towards what's going to happen on Good Friday when he's accused, and all of these pieces that are starting to come together, and these challenging pieces from the religious experts at the time. So I did some research on kind of what's happening here, because when we read this, we're like, please, dear God, yes, wash your hands and your cutlery and your food. Like, this is terrible COVID advice from Jesus, right? So, and I've wondered, like, why is it bad that they should, like, why is it bad that they're not washing things? Like, I was really confused at first glance. So the washing of all of this was not a universal Jewish practice. It had become this like, look at me action that religious people were using, like, to gain, like, to look like they were more holy, because they washed everything that was prepared for the meal. So it wasn't actually Jewish doctrine. And what's interesting is that Jesus responds with a well-known Jewish Old Testament text. So taking something that they have turned into be doctrine that's not, and responding with scripture is really a fascinating flip of the narrative. And so Jesus says that you're teaching human precepts as doctrines. So these purity codes were not totally for cleanliness, but they were for this covenant people. It was a way of being set apart. And the Pharisees, we're going to see moving forward, they're fanatics about purity codes. And that's where they get into a lot of trouble with Jesus. And so this flip to Isaiah, I just think is really interesting. When we did Micah before this, David. And so we taught people the old Hellerism of prophetic work is not about telling the future, but it's about a prophet telling things the way they are. And so when we look at prophets that way and see Jesus using prophetic language to tell things the way they are from a historic document, it's wildly, this interweaving of biblical genre, I think, is really fascinating. So I want to explore a little bit, and again, none of these questions are easy, so y'all pray for David and David. So the people are taking something that was not a religious doctrine, that was really more a tradition, and it become kind of a showy thing. So in modern context, what is a example of a human precept that has been accidentally made to be known as God's doctrine?
Yeah, something I was thinking of about when I was reading this passage. I mean, the first thing, I don't know if this is kind of what you were aiming for. I might have something later to kind of touch on the kind of showiness and that sort of thing. But when I was thinking about human precept and human doctrine, what I was thinking of, what came to mind was the half-truths that Adam Hamilton published when there's like different sayings that people say that think is in the Bible or closely related to the Bible. Just like a few of them are like, everything happens for a reason, and God only helps those who help themselves, and God said it, that settles it, I believe it. So that's kind of what came to my mind at first when I thought about these human precepts. Like, what have we put as doctrine? What do we think is something that God has taught us that we now believe that it's actually more human-based than it is God-based? So that's what came up to me. I had something about the showiness a little bit later, but that's when I was thinking, reading the human precepts, I was like, what are the half-truths? And then, not to get super political, but like a lot of times about the God and country, and like trying to think about like God bless America, and trying to, all those things that like coincide with patriotism and Christianity, and how we've joined the two a lot of the times. I don't know if that's really what Christ was getting at, and a lot of times in just the way he lived and the way he talked. And I think that's a really big thing right now that's just kind of put in place as a human precept that I don't know if that's necessarily God wanted to happen or God wanted with humanity or God prides it. I think we should be like, proud of who we are and the country we live in, but to the level of the patriotism that I see sometimes, I don't know if that's kind of more human precept or God designed. So that's kind of what I was thinking about a little bit with that in regards to the human precepts.
No, those are actually two of the main things I thought of. Were the first thing I thought of was the saying "everything happens for a reason," is because I just heard it again. There was some artist out of Nashville was on NPR and talking about she had 2 twins and one of them unfortunately passed away very early on, and she was grieving all of this. But then she comes back with this, yeah, but everything happens for a reason, and so therefore her son dying is supposed to turn into some really, really wonderful blessing from God. And I mean, for anybody watching, hopefully you never look at your kid and say, I hope that they pass away because it's going to end up in some better thing, right?
Yeah.
So that I feel like is a doctrine that people spit out, and it has no basis at all in any of Scripture. So I thought of those things, but even with the patriotism, like I think of Karl Barth's writings after World War I, when because I think sometimes, like, I get in trouble about talking about America sometimes with flag, or the flag in the sanctuary is a very much somebody, a lot of people think that is a God ordained thing that you have to have, and it turns out when you go to Belgium and they don't have an American flag in the Christian sanctuary, it's still a valid worship service. And Karl Barth was writing in the face of every nation that entered World War I thought God was on their side because their monarch was God ordained in that position. So even in the idea of history, I don't think, matter of fact, I know and I've heard people, even though we have this, representative democracy that we elect somebody and it's very obviously human chosen, there are still people who assume that person is ordained by God. To be in those leadership positions, whether it be president or city council or whatever it might be. So I think that it's eked out of church into the rest of the world. But the one thing, definitely in terms of the show, and I'm curious if you're thinking the same thing, but certain elements that we do in worship very much are, and like outside of worship, I think it's, I'm old enough to where I was in middle school during the WWJD bracelet craze. If you never got to experience that, and I just, when I was in middle school, it was athletic shorts and a t-shirt because I was that kid who didn't want to wear anything else. And so like the idea of even having a watch on my wrist was repulsive because it was just one extra thing I had to have. So then I have Christians who know I go to church and are very active, who are coming up to me and saying, you realize you're not wearing a WWJD bracelet. How are you ever going to tell people about Jesus? I'm like, I could use my mouth. It was really a weird experience. So I think we have showy things that we wear, showy things we do. But even, I've gotten in trouble with churches in which we haven't taken the offering up to the altar table. And as much as I agree with that as a principle of dedicating that money to God, do we really have to do that like in a show, or can we do that spiritually, or even saying the Apostles' Creed? I love the Apostles' Creed. I believe in the Apostles, what the Apostles' Creed says, but if we skipped it or didn't stand for it one Sunday, is God really going to strike us down?
Yeah.
So I think there are different elements that have become so ingrained in, if I don't do these, then I haven't really worshiped. That I feel like Isaiah and Jesus might have something to say about that.
Totally.
Yeah, I was thinking when I was writing this question, so David Maguianis, sorry. Oh. So I'm getting really good at muting, like when I have to cough. It's like a very new COVID skill.
I didn't know if you had not figured out or
no. I haven't figured out how to take my mask off and not get it stuck in my hair in worship, but I figured out how to mute and cough. No, so the Church of the Church of the Annunciation, one of them, some church in Israel. There is one that's dedicated to Mary, the mother of Jesus. And what they have done in this church is they've asked countries from all over the world to create a picture of Mary to put in the sanctuary. And I think we had a game in Israel, and this is horrible, but it was really interesting, is like if you were in a church and there was a white Jesus, you got 10 points. In Israel, like, and because they were hiring Italian artists, they weren't hiring Palestinian artists for these chapels and things. And so I think what was so cool about the Church of the NNC, whichever one it was, I don't remember now. Jamie Clark Souls, if you're watching, I'm really sorry. But it dismantled what I didn't realize was a human precept turned into God's doctrine for me until I saw a Chinese Mary, and I thought, oh my God, like, yeah, like in China, their version of white Mary is Chinese Mary. Like, it was one of these things, like, you're so used to how Mary looked, and she had like a blue, almost like hijab looking, like that's Mary. If you're going to play Mary in the pageant, that's what you need to be wearing. And we don't know what she was wearing clothing wise. I can give you a decent idea of what she looked like based on what we know from the region. But
I think it was a baby blue head covering and with a perfectly white smock underneath. Is that not right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. No, if you're pregnant, I don't know if that's what you want to be wearing. But isn't it interesting? Even the things like, because I think what you two hit on are things that the point of that too is when they're challenged, what happens, and that's where we're seeing lots of conflict right now. I think especially whereas that one, it was challenged in a way that wasn't abrasive for me in that church. And even if you're wondering, the Mary from the United States is gray, and she's got a whole rainbow of muted colors behind her, and so you can't really make out what color Mary is. And the one from Canada is even cooler, but such is the life. But I was thinking about that a lot when I was thinking about this question of even the times where I can talk about it on a big scale where maybe I pretend I don't do it. But my own human precepts that have been turned into God's doctrine continue to be dismantled in ways that are not abrasive. Yeah.
I think there's some value. Like, I think where they get lost here is, I mean, so Leviticus 15 talks about, like, you should wash your hands if you touch something that comes out of your body. I mean, essentially, if you go to the bathroom, you should wash your hands, is what Leviticus 15 says, which is good COVID advice.
Exactly.
If we're drawing on the Bible for COVID inspiration here. But, like, I just feel like it's taking good advice and making it law. Like, so taking good advice and making it law. It's like when you were talking about the church, I thought in Rome there's this church where it said that Constantine's mom basically purchased the stairs of Pontius Pilate's castle armory in Jerusalem and moved those stairs into this church in Rome. And so you go, and there are little glass bubbles you can look that supposedly have blood stains from Jesus, where he was flogged and whipped, as you go in there.
Wow.
And so you have to go up these stairs on your knees in humility. There's like a side set of wood stairs you can go up just on your feet, but to really do it, you got to go up on your knees. Well, it hurts. Like, it really, really hurts. And so we went in there. It was Lindsay and then 3 friends from college that we traveled with. And I thought, you know what, this is going to be a super holy experience. Like, I'm going to love this, and it's going to be so meaningful. And so I got on my knees, and I made it about 5 steps in when I realized, like, I'm old and my knees hurt. And it just wasn't meaningful at all. Like the idea of being there and like reminiscing about Jesus bleeding for me, I suppose, was meaningful, but like taking that to the extreme of you're not even allowed to walk up these stairs to experience the love of God without doing this one thing. It was kind of a light bulb moment of how many things we still do. Like, we don't take it to the extreme of indulgences or walking up the stairs on your knees or backwards or on your head or whatever. But the number of things that we say, you have to do this in order to faithfully live out or faithfully worship. And when you read the Gospels, I think you see Jesus over and over again is like, no, just eat the bread from the temple. It's fine. Yeah.
So that kind of leads to my next question, actually. So good job. Great transition. So this hand washing that's happening, I think Jesus's main problem here is that what is being done is like keeping everything safe and clean. Again, terrible COVID advice. But it's that it's that the Pharisees and the scribes had adopted this "look at me" attitude by doing something. It was like, bro, I'm so much holier than you. Look at how much cleaner my hands and my cups and my fruit and my meat and are than yours. And so I was thinking about that because, again, in the Bible, man, I love to look down on Pharisees and disciples and Israel in the Old Testament. And then I get these moments where it just hits like a ton of bricks that I find myself looking at myself and my own intentions and my own actions. And so where maybe sometimes where, whether personally or just the church as a whole or society, we developed or accidentally adopted a "look at me" attitude that is not about, I put in the email the main thing. So whatever you want to take that to be, however you interpret that question.
Scott Jones is watching, apparently.
Yeah.
He's the main thing guy.
Nice. For that question, so David, I was kind of on the same track as you were with when it came to worship. Actually, and the first thing that popped to mind was that rise of contemporary worship, and the rise of like how that turned out to be. It just was just fascinating to like how that was all about like me and just kind of like me centered and like it kind of bled into that kind of concert mentality of like lights and show and that sort of thing. And so like you see a lot of churches like making big production, which is good, I think, but in the sense it could also be in that borderline showiness and like, look at me and look at how good this is and look how well produced it is and that sort of thing. I mean, I just thought of this question or thought of this as well right now. But even in this COVID time when churches are doing online worship, like looking at churches and saying, oh, look how great that church is, or look how produced this looks, or is that really what we're like trying to find that balance of like looking produced, but at the same time having the genuineness of authentic worship that can be produced at home and to watch on demand. That's fascinating to me. I just realized that. And it just reminded me of a song that I really liked. I liked in like early high school was the Heart of Worship. It's talking about like, I'm coming back to the heart of worship, but it's not about me, it's about worshiping, that sort of thing. So those are some of the thoughts that I had as I was reading about this and the showiness of the Pharisees. And I think, Carolyn, you bring up a really cool fact about like how many times is that us, and that we need to take that hard look and to look at us and ourselves. I think that's important. Like I was thinking about all the stuff other people did, but then I was like, what about us? Like, what about me? And like, what do I do that I sometimes produce that looks showy or looks like, put it all put together type of thing. So those are kind of some of my thoughts.
Have you ever heard the story behind why Heart of Worship was? Yeah. So correct me if I get it wrong then, for people who are watching, if you remember, I'm coming back to the Heart of Worship song was this pastor or worship pastor in a congregation, I believe, was fighting over traditional and contemporary worship.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah. So, and they were fighting over, back when this was a
Classic
thing and still is a thing, about which was authentic, which was an authentic version of worship, and ended up writing this song. And they basically, I think, didn't have music in their church for a year.
Yeah, they stripped it all down. It was all a cappella, I think, at that point.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I just I wish I had the guts to do that sometimes. Like, what an amazing witness and moment to really challenge people on. Because when you brought up contemporary, I was thinking that was originated to be non-traditional. Like, it was originated to let the Spirit flow and to just have a loose experience of, loose but well-produced experience, I guess, of worship. And this is, I could speak volumes about my own rituals that turn showy, because I'm a 3 and I really like attention and affirmation. But the thing that always gets me is when I was in youth ministry and I would go to Christian concerts with youth. And then sometimes I haven't been in a long time, but like I go to Gateway, or I go to like really, really big church production on like a Friday or Saturday just for myself. And I'll go to a Hillsong concert and I'll love it. It's great. It fills me up.
Yep.
But the thing I started noticing was like the charismatic hand in the air, waving back and forth kind of moments. Then, I used to watch those and think, oh my gosh, people are really just filled. And I'm sure that on some level they are, but I started watching, like, there would be the first guitar strum of everybody's favorite song. And so the Heart of Worship would come on and people would instantly, there was no buildup. It was instantly, I'm doing this. And then as soon as the last drum beat hit and the last guitar chord strum, it was like nothing had ever happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was pretty much the same as, okay, I got to pull out my hymnal and I'm going to sing in my 4-part harmony, and then I'm going to close the hymnal. Like, it was so segmented that the charisma had turned into a ritual.
Mm-hmm.
And it almost, I think, turned into a show. The other thing, we went, a few of us on Creekwood staff went 2 years ago to the Right Now Media Conference. And what's that guy in Virginia? I can't remember his name, but he,
I don't know.
it's the church that Donald Trump, I know, went and prayed at on stage. And he wrote a book that is actually a pretty good book. His first name is David too, ironically. But
of course, his name is David.
Right?
I should just change my name to David.
You should. You can change your name in the screen right now if you'd like to.
David, Keri, Lynn, Lucas.
Absolutely. Just put it in quotes. But he came out and like instantly was talking about how convicted he was. He was going to change his entire speech. He just wanted to, it was confess and pray, and this really charismatic movement that I think could have been beautiful. But then he just said, we need to confess right now. And so he just started yelling at the top of his lungs about how sorry he was and all this kind of stuff. And on some level, this was like, it was really emotional, and it was really, and he said, I just want to invite everybody to come in here and do this. And so people started pouring into the aisles, and like on one level, it was different than Methodist churches. On another level, it was kind of neat to see people so convicted and so in love with God. But as soon as he got up and as soon as he stood up, everybody went from wailing and gnashing of teeth to sitting down, checking their phones again. And there was I looked at, I think it was Molly Trank who was with me, and our adult ministries coordinator, and I looked at her and I just said, it's almost like I feel bad for not participating. And I was wondering how many people went and did this because if I don't do it, or like, this is just the show we're putting on right now. And I hate that I'm skeptical enough to think that, but I think I've lived around enough Christians and church people that, we certainly do things just like washing our hands that are not in scripture, are not part of Jesus's teachings. But if somebody tells us we got to go wail on the floor and roll around, well, we're going to go wail on the floor and roll around because we don't want to be the one person who's not doing it.
Yeah. I think so. It's interesting that the critique of, now I'm going on a rabbit trail, so just warning, this was not in the email.
That's what we do.
This is what we do, David. Sorry. It's like hanging out with me in real life. So it's interesting that the critique of contemporary worship over time has been, it's too much like a concert, as a way of describing showy, because I just started getting into concerts right before the pandemic started. So it was a great time to face that fear, and have more concerts on the calendar that got canceled. It's fine. But I got to go to kind of my first big concert last year. I'm like a child. And I had the best time because, and I remember walking out and I literally said to the person who was with me, I said, I wish church felt like that. The community that was had, it was the House of Blues. It was this concert for these two bands. It was really cool. And the amount of community that was had, nobody was on their phones during any of the concert, except some people got it out to film or take a picture, but then they put it away. Because everybody was fully present and fully together, and it didn't matter if you were pushing past people to get to your friend. Nobody had their seat. And so it's fascinating to me that over time, churches like a concert is the critique, and yet it is a concert. Those of us who go to concerts find ourselves having a better community experience than sometimes even at church.
Well, y'all speak to then, so what's the benefit of the ritual? Because we still do these things.
Yeah.
And if you read, especially in the Old Testament, or Jesus says, here, break this bread and do this cup, and we do that every first Sunday of the month. So what would y'all say, just so we're not totally poo-pooing on all the ritual stuff, what's the difference then? What does a good ritual look like?
So I think even what was brought up earlier, so people who use their bodies a lot in worship. So in college, I went to Dallas Baptist University, and chapel was 3 times a week for an hour. And a lot of people really engaged in worshiping with their body. And so I think that for me, it's about the heart, right? Like, and I think Jesus says that later, right? It's about the intentions. It's the same thing with the way that burnt offerings became a look at me. When they're meant to be done genuinely, I think that those are what's pleasing to God. And so for some people, like if that's genuine and that's, you feel like that is worship for you and that's responding to the love that God has given you, that to me can become meaningful. I think communion's interesting you bring up. I never know which way to point. So communion for me, it's a ritual, but I think for so many people, the words in the liturgy are so classic and were chosen. If you've ever been to a general conference, they were chosen very carefully, and you had to have a lot of people agree on them to get voted on. We can't get anything through, but those words have made it through, and they've stood the test of time. And for me, like those words hold when I'm not feeling it. And I think sometimes ritual can be the thing that we engage in. We know what to do even when we're not feeling it. And that can be really powerful, because there are times, even as pastors, where we're not feeling it. There are Sundays where I walk in and I look at David Lessner and say, I'm cranky. Like, I don't feel it today.
I mean, at least 3/4 of the time, I think.
Yeah. Like no. But it's true. Like, there are just days, like even I would rather stay in bed. But why does it matter to get up and go, other than it's my job and that's what I get paid for? But why does it matter to keep showing up to church every Sunday, even when we're not feeling it? I think it's because at some point, church is still going to be there even when we're not feeling it. And we're going to keep engaging in those important things. And at some level too, even if it's not meaningful for me, it's meaningful for somebody else in the room. Mm-hmm. And that's okay.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree with that. I like that a lot. Definitely, like anything that it's like from the heart, it's a heart perspective. Like if you're like, that's 100% agree. And I think that's what Jesus is kind of getting at in this passage, is like what's coming from the heart, like what's the genuineness from the heart. And I always admire vulnerability a lot, especially coming from like a pastor, from someone from the stage, and just being vulnerable about what's going on in their life. And oftentimes I get the feeling that, you know, as Christians being in the church, we kind of need to put on a face when we come to church, or we need to put on this kind of like act that we have it all together. And I think when a ritual or something in the liturgy of the service or something allows for a vulnerable moment to happen, or something genuine to happen in that moment, where you can feel that kind of connectedness. Like at a concert, you kind of feel that the genuineness, authenticity, because everyone's in there. It's a shared collective. You kind of are all in this together, experiencing this kind of music moment. And the same way when in church, you kind of get those moments when it's like that, you know, those Holy Spirit moments where you really feel like everyone's connected. And maybe they're singing a song that whole church is passionate about. It's taking the sacraments of communion or baptism and just bringing us all together. I think is those moments where you truly feel like that authenticity, that genuineness, the bonding that happens from everyone in there in that congregation, being present and being in tune with the Spirit, just being together. Those are kind of what I would say could be good rituals.
Yeah, which I think is interesting that most songwriters would say the best music comes out of pain. And you could look at scripture and make somewhat of an argument about that as well. And that the most meaningful scripture are the one we rally around each other on to connect in a very vulnerable, good news kind of way. So,
yeah. We have got to move on. We could spend all day on this, I know. So hopefully, Julie Jones, we answered your question. Sorry if it felt like we were ragging on everything for a minute there, but I hope that, thanks, David, for bringing in that positive question we needed to answer. We needed to give some redeeming moments too. Because remember, we rag on the church, but we're part of it too. And so we want to be part of making it better and more authentic as well. Okay, we're going to do verses 9 through 13. So this is a continued, so this whole incident is very long and I've broken it up. So this is continuing with the same Jesus and Pharisees and scribes hand washing moment. So verses 9 through 13 said, "Then he said to them, you have a fine way of rejecting the commandment of God in order to keep your tradition. For Moses said, honor your father and mother, and whoever speaks evil of father and mother must surely die. But you say that if anyone tells father or mother, whatever support you have had from me is Corban, that is an offering to God, then you no longer permit doing anything for a father or mother, thus making void the word of God through your tradition that you have handed on. and you do many things like this. So this is a great moment that my dad just started watching. So this is going to be cool. So this is more direct communicator Jesus. He's not letting them go with one time calling them hypocrites, throwing out Isaiah. He has had it up to here with their nonsense. And so he's going to keep going. And so he brings up the fifth commandment, honor your father and mother, right? When he says this is what Moses said, it's really what God said, but we'll give Moses some credit. So Corbin, and I may be pronouncing it wrong. I'm pronouncing it like a name of a child, but whatever. I make the rules today. This was a special offering that was mandated in Leviticus, chapter 1, verse 2, if you're interested, right there at the beginning, as a special offering that was given to God. And so what Jesus is saying here is that they're taking this part of the law and saying, all right, whatever money you were supposed to be using to support your parents, if you give it to God, you don't have to support your parents anymore. Which, if you've got a bad relationship with your parents, sorry, that sounds awesome, but it's not. It's really not ideal. And especially in an Eastern context where honor is a bigger deal, I think, than we may understand in a Western context. But it was basically the church giving people permission not to take care of their parents for sake of the money that they would use to take care of their parents going to the synagogue. And that's some painful stuff. When I really kind of sat and thought about like the implications of this, they're changing the law to benefit the synagogue. And as a leader, like that killed. That really hurt. And so I asked the question, where do we make excuses? Like, well, it's for the church, for our, I think I put an email like less than honorable decisions. I would just say bad choices. So like I was thinking like I overwork, but I excuse it because it's for the church. So I throw that question to y'all.
I think that's the number, like, overworking from a staff clergy perspective, but I talked to more than one or two women or men who have had family issues because they volunteered at the church too much.
Wow.
And that was, I remember giving a sermon, it was during a Lent one time, and I was just called it too much. And we did too much of lots of other things, but I did too much church as one of those. And there were a few people that came up afterward and shared these stories of, you know, and most of them really loved the church and they did a great job. And we were culpable as leaders because once you find that person who's really good and says yes, you pretty much ask them to do everything because they're willing and it's easy to get them to do it. So they were spending more time up at the church than they were with their kids. Or they were working late nights because they already have a full-time job. Then they were being family and then they were losing sleep because they were trying to plan a mission trip or something. So I think the time element is certainly something that, I mean, most people are well within their healthy boundaries of the time they spend at the church, or too little. But there is a contingent of people who they just volunteer for everything and they take every class and they're up there all the time and to the detriment of their family.
Yeah, no, that's good. I agree with both of you guys. I actually didn't think about that until you guys talked about that, like how much is too much for the church and using that as an excuse to keep doing more and more and more and more and more. That's good. I really like that a lot. You guys, that's a solid point. The other thing I came up with was just maybe more on a general church history scale of like what has been justified in the name of church or of Christianity. You know, obviously a long list there of things. And so it's for the church is what some people will say, and obviously not and go against the basic principles of loving God and loving your neighbor for the purpose of the church and the institution of what the church is. So that's kind of the track I was kind of more leading on of like, it's for the church. We're doing it for the church. This is what we think the church says it calls us to do. But yet when you line it up to the greatest commandment, loving God, loving other people, is it really? And so that was a really cool perspective you guys brought up at the time, and that's what I was thinking of with my perspective. So yeah,
I think that's a good one. The weird thing about this is like I am someone who will tell anybody who wants to give any money to the church, we'll use it great. Like go ahead and give it. Like I'm not going to stop your generosity or get in front of you at all. Trust me, I'm going to let you give it. If you won it through the lottery or earned it through shady business, we will turn it into great things. That's what someone, I remember joking. We were at a conference one time and someone, was Faith and Money. And they're like, so here's the question. If a strip club owner comes in and wants to give you $1 million, do you take the money? And I think like before anybody else could think about it, I'm like, yeah, like.
That was a question in David's dad is one of our professors, and and he teaches the ethics classes, and I think that's like one of the test questions. Is there's a casino owner?
There's a casino being built, and it's by a church member that wants to like build the casino, but will use some of the funds to fund the church from the casino. Yeah.
I don't know if I could buy a casino because my answer was I'd take the money and I'd buy the strip club and give all the women other jobs, somehow or another. But
yeah,
I should have made that my answer. I think I gotta be in that class.
Casino might be a little bit more than $1 million, but I think it's interesting to think about it from a money perspective specifically, as Jesus is talking about here, because I've always been taught, and I've always said, like, if someone wants to be generous, like, we'll use it for a good purpose, and we should let them give their offering, whatever they want to give. Don't stand in their way to that. So I was struggling as I was reading this today. I was like, is there anybody I know who I would tell not to give their offering? And I think that the difference comes in is that they made it this absolutely mandatory thing of, it's no longer an offering of thanksgiving that, okay, yes, the law says you should do it. It's no longer an offering of thanksgiving or dedication. Now it's compulsory because the senior pastor knows my giving record and is going to treat me differently if I don't give it.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it becomes awful, again, when it becomes about the show, it becomes about the perception, and it's less about what you're giving to God. Because like, I'll still maintain, like, no one's going broke because they're given to the church. I've never met anybody who's doing that. If they were, I've told a few families not to give in the course of ministry, very, very few. But I think if like I ever turned it into a situation where I was looking down on people or not including them because of their giving patterns, that's where I feel like this becomes what Jesus is talking about, of just completely casting out people because they're not washing their hands correctly, or they're, I guess he is talking straight about hurting family members. But anyway, that came to my mind too.
Yeah,
that's good.
That's good.
Okay, I'm going to wrap up this story, and then we have to get to the rest of the excitement. So this is 14 through 23. It says, then he called the crowd again and said to them, listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside of a person that by going in can defile, but the things that come out are what defile. Terrible COVID advice. Like this time where this terrible COVID advice.
We've all read the articles about what's in the sewers right now.
Yeah. Oh, not. All right. Anyways, verse 17, when he had left the crowd and entered the house, his disciples asked him about the parable. He said to them, then do you also fail to understand? It's a bad day for Jesus. Do you not see whatever goes into a person from outside cannot defile, since it enters not the heart, but the stomach, and goes out into the sewer? Thus he declared all foods clean. And he said, it's what comes out of a person that defiles. It is from within, from in the human heart, that evil intentions come: fornication, theft, murder, adultery. I don't even know what that is. Whatever the next one is: wickedness, deceit, lasciviousness, envy, slander, pride, folly, and all of these evil things come within, and they defile a person. Jesus is just on a rant, naming all the sins. So Jesus is talking to the crowd. He tells them, and then it's disciples who need further clarification within the narrative, which we're going to see more of as this continues. So again, terrible COVID advice. But he talks about this defilement, this uncleanliness, which again, Mark is written with Jewish assumptions. And so something being unclean to a Jewish person is like ultimate, not ideal. Like death was the most unclean thing. So for Jesus to call something unclean is not just, hey, you didn't wash your hands after you touched a doorknob, but it is like the ultimate tending towards death in this Jewish assumption context. And so to say that the things that tend towards death are right there within our own selves. They're not coming from outside sources. They're coming from right within us that we allow to take over. so I kind of posed this question. So right now we live in a pandemic-stricken world where everyone's really concerned about if a virus comes into their body and hurts them. But Jesus is saying that what can really defile us is what is already there that we could let take over. So how do you both take both to get like what do y'all think about like what he says about like what can defile us from what's already within?
Yeah, I think when I was thinking about this question, I was like, what could defile from within? And I think it's like a lack of awareness of other people, I think, is what it kind of is. And especially now in this COVID world, I think we really see the American individualism that is kind of deeply embedded in our country. Like, it's all about me. It's all about what I think. I mean, even from the start of like, you see the toilet paper, like everyone like running and grabbing toilet paper for their lives, all the way now that we're all this way to the mask portion about like, I don't want to wear a mask. It's my personal freedom, my personal right to, and just like, it's a lack of awareness of other people and how we can care for other people. I think that's really what's like coming from out of people's heart and kind of showing on display, especially now. So I think Jesus' words right now are especially important to hear about. Like, look, it's kind of ironic that this virus that's going around is the one that hurts us from the inside, but really what's kind of being brought out of people is more this lack of awareness of other people, of a totally me mindset. I'm gonna look out for myself, not care about anyone else. And so it's just like that's what I think Jesus is kind of getting at, is like, stop looking at yourselves and start looking at like other people and look at your heart first, so that way it translates to loving other people. That's kind of how I understood that.
Yeah, thank you for putting that into such good words, because that's, I think, what I've been feeling this whole time, and I think you hit the nail right on the head. It is interesting. So like the unclean thing is interesting because that's a very individual action of like, I eat a potato and it goes through me and that's just me. But all the unclean things have to do with relationships, whether it be like the licentious sexual immorality or the extreme greed or like all of those take two people or take a group in there. And so it is interesting that Jesus is turning this from a personal salvation or a personal cleanliness into a communal corporate cleanliness, which I would argue that all of the Old Testament is about anyway. None of the Old Testament points toward like personal sanctification. It's all about communal well, some of it maybe, but like you're part of a larger whole. Like the sum is greater than what is it? The sum is greater than the sum of its part. The whole is greater than some of its parts. Whatever I'm trying to say. The cult theory, I know it's called that. David, what's interesting is, so I was out in LA one time and decided to drag my wife to 4 different churches on a Sunday. And yeah, she didn't make it to the 5th one, but she did go to 4. So one of them was Westwood United Methodist. It's right by UCLA, and they had this service called The Loft. It was totally conversational. They had 2 guys and a musician, and it was totally conversational. They even break you up into small groups. It was really an ingenious service. But one of the guys, they like, during the conversational sermon, they brought this guy up from the crowd, and he was a double PhD student in theology and film studies. Wow. And he talked about every secular apocalyptic movie. So like Armageddon, or Deep Impact or whatever they might be. All of those secular movies show humanity at its best when it comes together to conquer whatever this pandemic or whatever it might be. But he said every Christian movie about the eschaton always focuses on a hero who isolates and defeats everybody else.
Wow.
So the Christian movies are geared around the individualism, and the secular movies are geared around the collective whole of goodness. Which I've gone back and watched some of these. And he's absolutely right.
So good.
Yeah, I saw a tweet about this week. It wasn't about Christian movies, but it was a guy like genuinely asking, like, name me a movie where a collective group sharing equal power saves the day. Because even you could argue, like, even Avengers, it's not a collective group with equal power. And then I posed the question, like, how many of those movies pass the Bechdel test, that it's a collective group that includes more than one woman that saves the day. But I don't even know of any Christian apocalyptic movies that would have even a woman as the main character who saves. I can't think of one off the top of my head. That's fascinating.
That's
Sorry,
really
I didn't mean
cool.
to interrupt you.
No, it's I mean, that's yeah. It's just interesting when Jesus is talking about. So if the failure is collective and relational, then the solution also has to be relational and connective,
Yep.
right? And so when we as Christians are portraying out in the world like, hey, as long as you're going to be saved and as long as you're going to be raptured or as long as you're going to make it to heaven, like you're fine. And I think that's a very Western probably mentality versus maybe an Eastern idea like Judaism would have had. So
Yeah.
So here's your other fun fact about David Maguianis. So Creekwood has learned that my shtick in everything is I wrote my credo and some of my commissioning paperwork relating theological concepts to songs, but I stole that idea from David. I am not original. Here's what we're all learning about me by having all my friends on Bible study is I'm just a collection of people that are a lot smarter than me, and I'm just smart and take their stuff. So David wrote his whole credo, partnering every theological concept to a movie. And so like his Holy Spirit is about Star Wars. David Lessner, you'd probably cry if you read it. Like it is so good. Yeah, it's fabulous. So as soon as you started to say movies, I was like, oh man, I got it. Like this is David's thing.
Yeah, I love faith and film, and I get that from my father because he kind of passed that passion on to me. And so when you mentioned that, David, I was just like, that is so true. And I never just realized that. I was just like listening to all the ones that I've like watched and like so true. So very cool insight. Very cool.
Yeah. Major passion points there. So just had to share that bit because also like I think it's brilliant work that you did that, and I totally stole the idea. And now David Maguianis, our sermon series, the last 8 weeks has been the Beatitudes on Broadway, which has just been like, I mean, David Lessner's done great, but like it's I'm running out of personality traits for us to exploit for sermon material.
That's awesome.
It's been fabulous. Okay, let's do the Syrophoenician woman. And
this should be a good
other. I'm like, we need the last 30 minutes.
Fun fact about this, I had to preach this, not this one in Mark, but in Matthew. I had to preach about the Syrophoenician woman in Matthew, and I was stumped all the way up until almost I was preaching because I was like, how am I going to preach a sermon off of this text? This is interesting. But I'll let you go ahead and read it, and then
because you'll have like the best answer to it. This will be great. David's already done the work. All right. So from there, he sent out and went away to the region of, I think it's Tyre, like what's on a car? Mm-hmm. Yeah. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there. Yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and bowed at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of Syrophoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. But she answered him, Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. Then he said to her, for saying that you may go, the demon has left your daughter. So she went home and found the child lying in bed, and the demon was gone. So I'm going to try to explain it, but David Maguianis, since you've researched this a lot for a sermon, feel free to chime in where I get it wrong. So Tyre is this northwest region of Galilee, which is mostly a Gentile population. And so I think that kind of explains like Jesus's the start of his reaction to her. So he goes in a house, he's trying to hide. He's got this desire for seclusion, which we've seen before. Jesus goes on a mountain to pray. He stays behind so he can walk on water and really juke the disciples, I think is what we decided last week until Lindsay corrected us that we totally missed that he like went to pray first.
Right.
That was fun. It was awesome. So he's noticed, and there's this woman that comes to him talking about her daughter being healed. And so this is the only character in the Gospel of Mark who I would argue wins an argument with Jesus. Mm-hmm. Many try, only one wins the argument with Jesus. So Jesus says, let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take of the children's food and throw it to the dogs. So that's a very confusing metaphor. But basically he's calling her a dog because of her Gentile status. It's almost a racist remark. And when he says,
like, I know it's Jesus we're talking about, but I'm pretty sure you can label it a racist remark.
It's totally a racist remark. Yeah. This is jerky Jesus. But so children here is meant to be like Israel. Let the children be fed first. And I think some people interpret this to be like Jesus' scope of his ministry. And this is a moment where he understands the expansion of it. Because in Mark, with Jewish assumptions, Jesus came to reform Judaism. I think it's also interesting in this. So she responds, and very seldom in scripture, in gospel specifically, do women speak. And usually if they speak, they don't get to be named. It's either one or the other. You almost never get both together. But she leans into the insult. She leans into the metaphor, and she takes what he's saying and she says, okay, fine. If I'm a dog, dogs still at least get some of the crumbs. We still get something. And she makes her point with the metaphor. And I think what we see here, and in verse 29, when he says, for saying that you may go, the Greek word used is logos for the word that she says, which is in John, the logos is the word used to describe Jesus. And so I think we can take that to mean like she's proclaimed the gospel, that the message is not just for the children at the table, but even for the people you're going to call dogs. And this is where we see the expansion of Jesus's ministry beyond Jewish people. And so I think this can be kind of the inciting incident from that. And even to like, not just to Jewish people, but even to women on their own account. And I think it's really interesting that this is like an at a distance healing, because in the stuff before this, you're seeing like the woman who's been bleeding, who says, if I can only just touch his robe, and people are having to be brought to Jesus. And in the chapter before this, when it's a town of people who are rejecting him and they can't be brought to him, they can't be healed. But this healing's at a distance. We don't get any word of him touching it's just because of what the woman says. So before I ask my question, any thoughts or points to add on the very difficult passage and how in the world to interpret this?
No, I think you got all the points that I had researched when I was preaching on it. I think it was all the points. The biggest one being like, I think this was like, we tend to see Jesus like try to be inclusive, and I think it's in this moment when his ministry expands just beyond the Jewish people. Just because of his response and her response and just their interaction. I think this is like that moment where it's like, okay, like I'm not just to the Jewish people, but to everyone. I think he comes to that realization in that moment, we can go down a whole theological track of like, when did Jesus realize he was the Messiah? Like, did he know when he was like 2 years old that he was going to be nailed up on a cross type of thing? And when did he have that foresight? So like, maybe it's at this moment we see a little bit more about what you were talking about of Jesus' humanity and like being revealed, like, hey, maybe I'm not just to the Jewish people, but to all people. So no, I think that's one of the big insights. And then I have something that I think we can get out of this passage, and we'll come back to it later unless David has any other points for this passage.
Well, I was just thinking it's an interesting juxtaposition. You kind of have to suspend some, like the conversation earlier about doctrine, like what are human precepts we've made doctrine. I almost said inerrancy of the Bible. And then Jesus is quoting scripture, but Jesus is quoting scripture not in the way that it was written in Isaiah, or Paul does it in ways. And so we've made the Bible, the Bible has inspiration. I fully believe that, but it's this collection of wisdom from the Spirit, from the tradition that we carry. And so we assume when we're reading in Mark, like, okay, everything in here I've been taught is completely 100% exactly what it was, how it went down. And so you've got Mark in chapter 1 introducing, this is the Son of God, who you would assume would know all of this. And then you've got this turning point that almost to me sounds like a literary device of, okay, we need to open the door up here. So let's come up with a story, or let's think of a story that we know about in which Jesus reached out to somebody else, and let's use it as a transitional moment. Now, it's not the first non-Jewish person that Jesus has healed, but it's a very definitive thing, because I don't know, and I haven't studied Mark too extensively, but I think that his audience was familiar with Judaism, but also Greek in listeners. So they might be wondering, where do we fit in the story? And so this is the story that opens up that door. That it's just weird, though, that the story that opens up that door, the Son of God is realizing something he didn't know before, or getting an argument. And that's like, it's only not problematic to me if we're able to kind of suspend our dogma a little bit and say, you know what, it's a story. It probably happened. Like, it happened. It just, maybe it happened like this, maybe it didn't. And to have some mystery and some wonder in there, if we're really getting into the nitty gritty, because the idea that Jesus would ever say something to me and I would be like, yeah, but let's talk about it this way, is just ludicrous. I mean, it's just absolutely crazy. So I think that is something for people who may be watching and participating, who have a really hard time reading the Bible, because when you read the Bible and you take every detail as this is a historical fact, you get in some really messy situations in logic. And so this is one of those stories I think you have to kind of like take your hat, put it on, read it, get something from it, and move on a little bit.
So why don't I ask my questions that I have for this to give us some direction to keep talking about this. So by definition, I'm fairly certain I'm correct that neither one of you are Jewish by descent. I feel like I should know that about you.
We did the spit test. We got a small fraction.
The big joke when we were in Israel is like, my hair looks a lot like a lot of Jewish people have very curly hair. So I've always wondered, I want to do a spit test one day. But technically, I'm not like Jewish enough to qualify for the birthright trips or whatever, right?
So I want to interrupt real fast. And me and a classmate, when we were at Candler, had to go for sociology of religion to examine the sociology and the culture of another religion, worship environment. So we went to this Orthodox synagogue down the road from Candler, and these people agreed to talk with us afterward when they were doing cookies and punch. And so we talked, and I introduced myself, and I said, my name's David Lessner, and the guy immediately was like, "You're home." And I was like, "What?" And he goes, "Lessner is a great Jewish name, and you must." And and I'm like, "I don't like. I thought it was German. Yeah, I don't like." So I'm almost club, I feel like.
So neither one of you are super Jewish that I'm aware of. Don't ruin my question here, people.
Sorry.
But we're the dogs in this passage, right? Like, if we're going to put ourselves in this, we're the dogs, because we're Gentiles, kind of. We're not Jewish. So what are the implications of this story? Like, David, maybe from your sermon, what can we learn from the story, but also what is to be learned from the Syrophoenician woman? And not to say that we should go around challenging Jesus all the time. That is not what is to be learned here. Right. But maybe even in going back with some of what we were discussing, why is this not only for seeing the expansion? Why are we seeing Jesus be challenged this late in the narrative? Why is this not a story when Jesus was 12? What can we learn from? What can we learn from the woman? I'll throw it to you.
Yeah. Well, I kind of think that this story gives us permission to stand up to God. I think that's kind of how I see it. I say I think this story gives us permission to say look, God, I just I don't know how people are in their situation, but I think in this woman's situation, she was desperate. She was in need. She needed something to happen in her life, and she was like, "I'm going to call you out, God, because I need something to happen." And she was just that's kind of how I took it. And that's kind of how I preached it. That I think this gives us permission to call out God and challenge God and be like, "Look, I want something to happen." And so, I don't know. Looking back, I don't know if this is how I would still preach it, but I think there's still elements in there that I think there might be people out there that might be afraid to challenge God, or might feel like it's wrong to challenge God or to question God, or to be like, "God, why is this happening?" God, make something happen in my life. There might be people that just aren't comfortable with that. But I think this we see this clearly, that this woman's like, look, God, look, Jesus, I need something to happen. I want my dog to be healed. Like, please do something. Like, and she even goes to the point to like, does that rebuttal and was like, look, like, fine, if you don't accept me as this, just accept me as just something little at this point. Just accept me as just as I am at that point. And I wonder if that was enough to move Jesus to be like, yes, I will do this for you, type of thing. So I don't know. That's kind of what I was thinking. That's kind of how I preached it a couple of years ago. And I don't know if I would do it now like that, but that's kind of what I was thinking.
Well, I think the way you described it, it's very similar to the like faith the size of a mustard seed that was earlier in Mark, right? And so it's okay, I may not be the full package, but I've got a little something. Or if I only just grab a little bit of the cloak, like there's a couple of different instances in Mark where, because we've been asking the question, like, how big does your faith have to be in Mark in order for Jesus to do something? And I think what we're learning here is that for Jesus to use you and you to be a part of the kingdom, it doesn't take perfection. It doesn't take perfect ritual. It takes just a little bread. It takes a little seed. It takes just a little footstep to say, to be part of it. When I read this, I think of the if somebody wants the benefits of the kingdom, it will not be denied to them. Like if somebody wants to partake in what the kingdom offers, no one will be turned aside. And whether that was the original intent or not, I think when we look at it from like church world, throughout Christian history, we've been very good at defining who's not in. And while we're busy defining who's not in, the true movement of God is sweeping right along somewhere else besides us. And all of a sudden we start to see that remnant rise up and really become the church, and we get left behind. So I think that whether it's Jew or whether it's Greek or whether it's Latin or Chinese or Spanish or whatever it might be, I think it really shows that if someone desires with a little bit of faith to pursue God, God is 100% like 100% bought into the idea of that person being in.
Yeah. I've thought a lot about so in verse 29, the way that Jesus responds. So let me take what David Lessner says, to the way one human responds to being challenged by another human because of his racist remarks. I think is worth discussing with our last 10 minutes. I think it goes without saying we've all been challenged in the ways in which we're implicitly or explicitly racist. And I think what's been hardest about this time is what came from the passage before, is we've learned not the ways we're racist necessarily like on purpose or what is outside of us, but what's already within us. And I think that's what's bothered a lot of people and why there's been so much resistance to this kind of, I hate to say, like round of revolution that we're seeing, is because what's being called out is what's already been inside of us that's being called out, right? We're seeing a non-white Mary and realizing that that's what we have thought our whole lives. And it's challenging. And so Jesus says to her, you have said gospel, you have said, for saying logos, for proclaiming, even though you leaned into my racist metaphor, you still proclaimed that even in a system of children and dogs still get something. And I think that Jesus would argue now, like the more ideal would be that all would be children at the table and there would be no dogs underneath. But I think even in a situation where it's hard to look at this and go, well, how did God not know? I think we see the grace of God in Jesus's response to being challenged for a moment that he was wrong or living into his upbringing, and realizing that can hurt people. There's my controversial moment for the night.
Well, I think it gives us I think it gives us a model. So drawing off of how David kind of brought that into a smaller context of even if it's just a little bit, and you're talking about the racism part of things or the differences part of things, or the way that Jesus responds in grace, I think it gives us a model of opening our eyes and opening our ears and opening our heart to just that little bit in the other person, of when we think we're totally closed off, just a little bit forms a relationship. And I think of the book Same Kind of Different as Me, where it's not only white and black, but it's also poor and wealthy. And it's just one little bit that intrigues and almost infests this great, Greg Kinnear plays him in the movie, but infests this guy to where he can't let it go. And so I do think that I think it provides a really hopeful piece of relationship, that when we think everything is finished or when we think everything is closed, just a little bit is all we need to keep on finding where God is leading us in that. But I'm glad you brought that up. I think it's an important point now.
Yeah, definitely. That was a good point. Good point.
Well, I started in the last 10 minutes, so always a really good time to get to your hard-hitting stuff. Any other thoughts on the Syrophoenician woman? Kathy Bradford says it's a tough passage, and I agree. It required Bible study prep for Wednesday nights, peek behind the curtain. I don't know, David Lessner, how much time you spend. It takes like maybe an hour to read through it, and if you're the person leading and kind of do the research and write the questions. And all day, you can ask Patty Festa all day yesterday. I just kept saying, like, why am I not done with this? Because trying to figure out what in the world Jesus is saying here required lots of books and lots of Google. Even pastors use Google. There's your peek behind the curtain.
All pastors use Google.
All of them do. Yeah.
Completely. So any other thoughts on this?
It's just challenging because it's a multitude of things. You've got implicit racism in there, and then you've got the fact that it's coming from Jesus, who's all loving, and then you've got the question of, well, is God all knowing as well? And it just opens up a whole lot of theological worms that, because we've been in Christian tradition now for over 2,000 years, we're inheritors of things that we've just accepted and been told is true. And this is a passage that invites, like, I think David said it really, really well. It invites us to challenge what we've known directly from God, or what we have thought is directly from God, kind of like the hand washing at the very beginning. Like, it invites us to challenge that so that we can have a more authentic relationship with God and with each other. So it's a really hard passage in multiple ways.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, well, I'll read this last little section and
let's talk about spitting on people here.
Yeah, terrible COVID advice. Terrible COVID advice. That is this whole passage. So this is Mark chapter 7, verses 31 through 37. And we have a lot of names, so this will be really fun for me because I never actually say it with confidence and pretend like I know. I go, well, I don't know. So it says, then he returned from the region of Tyre and went by Sidon towards the Sea of Galilee in the region of the Decapolis. They brought to him a deaf man who had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to lay a hand on him. He took him aside in private, away from the crowd, and put his fingers in his ears, and then he spat and touched his tongue. Then, looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, Epaphatha, which means be opened. And immediately his ears were opened, his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. Then Jesus ordered him to tell no one, but the more he ordered them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. They were astounded beyond measure, saying, he has done everything well. He even makes the deaf to hear and the mute to speak. So a couple of notes. So this is the second time the Decapolis is mentioned in Mark. We had talked about it whenever time. It's just the center of culture. It's where everything, it's 10 cities together. It's what's happening in Galilee. It's like the
Greek influence.
Okay, yes, lots of Greek influence. But what we're seeing here is more movement of Jesus. This is, again, we're pointing towards rising action towards Jerusalem. So it's interesting in this. I think there was a lot of literary parallels to this story and the disciples, with the deafness and the blindness of this person. Deafness and blindness in Mark are used to be this like symbolic inability to understand Jesus and respond to him in faith, right? So it's the Syrophoenician woman who's not part of the 12 who knows what Jesus can do and asks and challenges Jesus. But it's the disciples who need the private explanation of direct communicator Jesus from verse 14 in this whole chapter. Though it goes back to the kind of synopsis of Proverbs, right? Those who think they understand are in fact foolish. And we're going to continue to see that with the disciples moving forward. And I think one commentary I read said this falls in the deafness and the blindness and even the incorrect speech or the muteness of the Pharisees and the scribes, who are taking something, they're totally missing the point, and they're incorrectly preaching what is doctrine. And it's a reintroduction of Jesus healing by touch, and it's weird. He's like spitting and sticking his fingers in people's ears, and that's just gross.
Give it someone away.
I don't even know how to explain that one. If either one of you have read something that will prove to the world you know more than I do on that one, that's good. Yeah. Oh man.
Curious how many people would go for it.
I hope people are like scrolling and like haven't been watching Bible study and they see that. Like, I hope the bishop is like, what are they talking about?
Like, who's writing those things anyway?
Anyways, so any thoughts on just some of the literary parallels here, or difference in healing, or spitting, or sticking fingers in people's ears, other than don't?
No, I think you hit it right on target, Keri, Lynn. It's just like, Katie Glass says she loves Jesus but doesn't want to be spat upon. Nice. Yeah, I think you hit it right there. I think like that framing with the disciples and the Pharisees, I thought it was just so interesting to see like the progression of stories. Like, you get Jesus being all like, look, this is how it is. Like, stop being so showy. Stop doing things just for show and like on display. And then you go to like the disciples. He's like, same thing. Stop doing this. Like, I need to explain this to you. I need to like break it down for you. And then you get to the woman, and then you get to someone who's like blind and can't hear. And that's the person that Jesus is like, this one gets it. This one gets it. And so it's just like so strange to see that the juxtaposition between all the characters in this chapter, and how it just kind of all wraps up with this person who is deaf and is the one who gets it. Like, this is like just, and I think the curious thing for me that I found, I think obviously because he's deaf, I think people brought him to Jesus, right? Like, he didn't ask for healing. I don't think he asked, or he just kind of received it. And I think it's like, what a cool parallel to our life, that like, if all we just need to do is just be and receive the healing that Jesus gives us. And that's all we need to do, is just present ourselves as like, here, this is who I am. Just like the woman was like, here, this is who I am. Like, take me as I am. And that's all we need to offer for Jesus, and for our wholeness and salvation and that sort of thing. And not trying to be showy, not trying to project this thing. And what a great lesson for us to just try to practice as Christians, as the church, to just be who we are. And I think goes back to the talk about vulnerability, authenticity with worship. And it's a really cool string of how it all ties in together towards the end of this chapter.
Yeah, I think it does bring it into like, I mean, it's kind of the community we saw in Mark chapter 1, where the guys lower their friend through the roof. And another, I mean, it brings it back to that communal nature of healing, which all the things that defile are community things. And well, now a community thing is healing this guy who's, deaf and mute as well. So the spit thing, I actually looked up the spit thing earlier. Apparently there's some thought that spitting was thought by Greek physicians to be a salve for blindness. Like, so spit had some kind of medicinal qualities of curing blindness. And so Jesus could have been speaking into that culture, or showing that culture in the Decapolis that he had control of these properties, or was better than medicine at that time. So that was one thing. But like, from a devotional sense, when I read this, I thought of, Jesus talks about everything that's inside of us is what defiles. Now, he's somebody who takes something inside of him, his saliva, and spits it out, and it's clean and it heals, which makes Jesus very different than us. And so, whereas we are people who have this pride about ourselves that we are going to do whatever we want to do and take care of our own self, Jesus is somebody that the inside is pure and willing to spit on people, in a holy way. So that was
isn't it interesting that section of Jesus's wholeness and Jesus's goodness and Jesus's godlikeness comes right after a very challenging section about Jesus's human. Like, we can look at the Syrophoenician woman and think, oh man, celebrities, they're just like us. And then you read this one and you're like, no, they're not.
What I do think is great about this, and I think what's great about the way we're doing this study, and I hope everyone like participating feels this way or sees this, is normally when we preach, we pick out like one story and we go with the Syrophoenician woman, or we go with the healing, and we just do that story. And occasionally we can be not very good about connecting it to the whole. And when you study the whole chapter, especially week after week with the flow of the narrative, you can see how a lot of stories are so much more meaningful and rich when you read them in the context of what Mark is trying to do here. So I hope that's kind of a plug for me. I've said it in Creekwood about 1 million times. I hate bumper sticker theology, and I hate it when we take Bible verses just out of context. And so this is my plug for like actually sitting and reading the whole Bible to get the fullness and richness of God's wisdom.
Yeah, so true. So true.
I second the motion.
Yeah. I didn't think any of y'all were going to disagree with that, but I just wanted to throw it out there.
Wouldn't you? Would that be so funny if I'd be like, I'm going to push back on that a little bit?
Push back. I would like the Jefferson Bible where I cut out the parts I don't really like.
I'm a little bit in on that concept, but let's not. There's a reason that scripture is the way it is, and we take it the way we take it. So,
hey, so when you become Pope, like Pope Francis changed the Lord's Prayer for Catholicism, I'm pretty sure recently.
Yeah.
He switched from instead of lead us into temptation. So when you become Pope, you can change like our Father to our God or our Sovereign, and you can do all the things that you want to do. And I'm happy to support you in that.
That's I'll put you in the forward of the memoir or something.
Sweet.
Oh my gosh, this is so fun. Well, I am out of questions and we are out of time. I don't need to keep everybody up with bedtime stories like we normally do. But David Maguianis, thank you for joining us.
Yeah,
David
thank
Lessner,
you.
thanks for being here as part of your job description. Crack myself up. No, seriously, thank you both. I'm telling y'all, here's all we're learning with Bible study is that I hang out with people a lot smarter than I am.
And we get to hang out with you who's smarter than we are. So
exactly.
Man, y'all are just, I put in my little share of this, like I have so many great Davids in my life. And so it's just cool to have both of you on this and going through some of this stuff and having all of our people commenting. Really appreciate everybody who's hopping on every week and offering such great material.
And we've got, that's David, you're our second guest, David.
In a row.
In a row. And then we've got another one of my friends who's coming in like 2 weeks, I think, who's David Briggs, who's out in Lufkin. So
nice.
I really do feel like I'm going to ditch some of the people I was going to call and just go after everybody named David I know.
Cool. Neat. I really am going to sign in as David, Keri, Lynn, Lucas one week. I think it'd be really funny. So David Maguianis, so next week Shandon is our special guest.
Yes.
So Shandon and David switched for a couple of reasons. So I'm really excited to have her on. Shandon and David Maguianis work at the same church. So we have two Richardson folk 2 weeks in a row.
Yeah, look at that. Yeah. Well, thank you guys for having me. It's been awesome to chat with you guys and to dive into this passage. It's been a good time.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you for joining us, everybody. We're going to sign out, and it's bedtime at our house, so I'm going to go read Harry Potter and put kids to bed. So, all right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.